We're really glad to have with us a few panelists today to talk about their experiences of the Clinical AI Fellowship. And we'll get into that panel shortly, but I just want to give a bit more time for those who are still joining us to join. So while we're waiting for that to happen, I guess just a few bits of housekeeping. When our panelists are on screen, if we could ask everyone else to keep themselves muted and videos off, it just helps the recording show only the people that are talking, which is helpful. If you have any questions for our panelists at any point, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll come to the questions in the second half of the session. And Alicia will be looking after the questioning for about 20 to 1 onwards. And any questions are very welcome. Questions for our panelists about kind of their experiences at the fellowship, also, I guess, more practical questions about how to apply and that sort of thing, all very much in scope. So I think that's enough waffling from me. Why don't I kick things off? It's a great pleasure to have you all with us today. We're going to be talking to some of our panelists from the Clinical AI Fellowship. Now, for those that haven't heard of the Clinical AI Fellowship, this is a NHS-aligned fellowship in clinical AI. The intention of the fellowship is a 12-month program. It gives people an opportunity to work part-time in clinical work, but also part-time in some sort of AI role, often in implementation or evaluation of an AI technology in practice. And fellows are eligible to apply from a diverse range of different clinical expertises, and they get benefits both working in their clinical role and in their new AI role as well. And we've got a few panelists with us today that I'm going to ask to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll kick off with some questions. So panelists, I think we've got Akriti, Nanda, we've got Baz, Chada, we've got Charlie, Winward, and we've got Nick Davda. Are you all on screen? Yeah, brilliant. A quick wave for all our panelists. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to come to each of you in turn and give you a bit of an opportunity to introduce yourself. So we'd love to hear a bit about you. What motivated you to join the Clinical AI Fellowship Program? And just briefly to tell us about what you did during your program. So maybe if we could come to you first, Charlie.
Yeah, morning. Oh no, it's not after. It's afternoon now. It's already gone. Hello, my name's Charlie, and I'm a physiotherapist. I work in neurorehabilitation in Oxford, in a specialist rehab centre, and I was in cohort 3, so that finished in August 25. And my reasons for applying, it's such an exciting program, and I had the opportunity as an AHP. So it was the first year that the fellowship had been open to NMAPs, so that's nursing, midwifery, and allied health professionals. And from that point of view, it was a really strong program for me to apply for. I have to confess, I probably didn't know as much about AI at all as I thought I did at the time before joining it, but I certainly did afterwards. And it's probably quite unusual. I was an allied health professional, but I went into a lung chest x-ray deployment program. And the biggest part of the program for me is about that deployment, about real-time AI products coming into the NHS and that whole program. Unfortunately, I can say a little bit more about that afterwards, but it didn't quite work out to plan. But nothing does in 12 months and nothing does in the NHS. But such an exciting program for me. And actually, in the end, it resulted in me writing a guideline paper for allied health professionals on how to deploy into the NHS.
Great, thanks, Charlie, and really good to have you with us here today. So if we have any AHPs on the call or people working in other specialities, other parts of healthcare, or even not in healthcare at all, and you're thinking about building a career in clinical AI, maybe think about some questions you might want to ask Charlie and drop them down in the chat for us. Brill. I think next we'll go to Baz, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be here. So by way of a background, I'm Baz. I'm a GP registrar in Northwest London. And my kind of motivations for doing the AI fellowships, I was also in cohort 3 along with Charlie and Akriti, so finished in August just gone. And I thought it would kind of complement some of the experience or exposure I'd had to AI prior to the fellowship. So before the fellowship, my exposure to AI had kind of been from an academic perspective. I'd done a master's in health informatics. From a kind of health policy perspective, I'd had some involvement with NHS X, as it was at the time, now the Transformation Directorate, and kind of more of an entrepreneurship or commercial perspective, having done a health tech fellowship before. But what I hadn't done was kind of really get under the bonnet of an actual real world AI project that was being deployed on the ground. And so I felt that it was kind of high time I got stuck into an example of an actual way in which AI was being used in the NHS. So that's something, I guess, again, we can go into this later, but I would encourage fellows to think about specifically what their motivations are, I guess, for wanting to do the fellowship rather than just saying they're interested in kind of AI in the main. And then my fellowship project specifically was looking at AI in mental health, which is sort of both an interest of mine, but also I think quite complementary to my clinical background as a GP, looking specifically at developing, validating, and now deploying a predictive model to identify high intensity mental health service users, which is based across King's and the Maudsley, which many of you will know is one of the largest kind of mental health providers, certainly in the UK, if not in the world. And then, yeah, I'm happy to get stuck into a bit more about what that entailed, but yeah, I guess I'll pause there.
Great, thanks, Baz. Really helpful background and great to have you with us today. Should we go to you next, Akriti?
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Loud and clear.
Fantastic. Thanks, Charlie. So yeah, I was with Baz and Charlie in cohort 3, and I'm a general surgical registrar in South London. So there were a few surgeons on the course. And my motivation was similar to Baz's in that I hadn't had anywhere near as much experience as him before, but I'd got quite interested, and I've got a few friends who work on the technical side of AI, and they'd all said that the last bastion is deployment, and I could see that very clearly in the NHS. And then this fellowship popped up, and I thought, wow, what a forward-thinking thing that the NHS has created. I'm not sure I'll get it. I don't know if I'm the kind of person that they're looking for, but it's worth a punt. And it was just amazing. I got a radiotherapy based project. So surgery, there are AI projects, but not very many at all in the deployment stage. So we can talk more about it later, but I think you have to be quite comfortable in exploring an area that's adjacent to or complementary, as Baz said, to your specialty, but not be tied to it must be your specialty. But yeah, that was my motivation to it. I thought it was a wonderful program, and yeah, that's why I applied.
Great, thanks, Akriti. Great to have you with us, and nice to meet another person working in the perioperative space. I happen to be an anaesthetist as well, so almost got a little bit of an MDT going on here, haven't we? And then last but not least, Nick, let's go across to you.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name's Nick Davda. I'm a neurologist by training, and I currently work as a clinical AI scientist. I completed my clinical training in London, based at UCLH, and over recent years, I've become increasingly interested in the discrepancy between what AI is often claimed to be able to do for patients and what is actually delivered safely at the point of care. And that prompted me to focus through my career path down the applied clinical AI path, digital health and innovation across the NHS, and then more recently, commercial settings. I was part of the second cohort of the NHS Clinical AI Fellowship, and I followed that up with a Topol Digital Fellowship to be able to complete some of the work that I began in the NHS Fellowship. So as part of that, I worked as a research fellow at King's College London, and have since transitioned into industry, where I now work as a scientist at a company called Pangea Data. In this role, I work with clinicians and software engineers to design and validate NLP and LLM-based tools that analyze electronic healthcare records to identify undertreated or undiagnosed patients. So I'd say my core interest is in how we design and evaluate complex AI tools so that they're safe, clinically useful, and sustainable within real-world healthcare systems, and in how clinicians can play an active part in that process. So I think my motivation to join the fellowship really began when I was looking for a computational orientated PhD project. So I was quite interested in how digital data can be used to make clinical predictions, and some of my previous published work was in that area as well. So in that search, I encountered the AI Fellowship, and that gave me a chance to get involved in exactly that kind of work alongside my clinical training. So only very briefly, during the fellowship, my main project was a feasibility and performance study of a deep learning neuroimaging AI tool for MRI head scans. And I was responsible for designing the study protocol and the clinical workflow, and then working with the IT teams at King's College Hospital to integrate that into their local systems, which we just about managed to do. and we're now writing up the performance data from that study. And I also helped to write some of the QMS documents to help the academic group progress that tool towards a UKCA marking.
Great. Well, thanks, Nick. Really, really fantastic rundown. You brought us onto a topic of the next question, really, which is around kind of future career pathways. So I'll come to each of the panelists in turn, but maybe we can come back to you first, Nick, just to kind of expand on your answer a little bit. Just thinking, I guess, from the perspective of some people on the call who might not understand too much about what things like QMS or UKCA marks means. You've used some quite technical language there, so I'm inferring that your two fellowships, the Digital AI Fellowship and also the Clinical AI Fellowship and the Digital TOEFL Fellowship, have given you insights and experiences into a different world compared to your clinical world. Could you tell us a bit more about kind of how the fellowships shaped your career pathways, and do you plan to stay in the kind of AI space, or are you looking to kind of build a portfolio career? What do you think your future holds?
Yeah, sure. I apologize for
No, it's good.
using the jargon. I should bear that in mind. Yeah, no, I think it's certainly affected my career path massively. I think it served as an initial springboard. So it gave me the ability and opportunity to work at that intersection of clinical medicine, academia, and the health tech industry, which is pretty exciting at the moment, as we all know. And I think the fellowship did open the door for me to have that kind of hybrid working week. So it's given me the ability to help drive the development and innovative solutions at a time when the NHS is trying to do more with less, and at a time when we have the ability to deploy those solutions at scale to help large numbers of patients. So yeah, I think I do intend to continue working in AI-focused roles. My current role as a scientist is already taking me down that path, and I'd expect future roles to build on that. I think I'll always be a clinician, but probably also always be involved in digital health and particularly AI-related work to some degree.
Great, thank you. And just as a quick follow-up, if anyone has any questions, I guess, for our panelists based on what they're saying, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'm just thinking anyone on the call who's interested, who maybe is working clinically at the moment and is exploring opportunities to build out a portfolio career or to expand into AI-related roles, think about any questions you might want to put to our panelists about their experiences. It might be helpful. Thanks, Nick. That was really helpful. Should we come to Akriti next? Just a reminder, the question is around how the fellowships shaped your career aspirations and what's your plan for the future? Do you plan to work in AI, purely clinical, a bit of both? What are your thoughts?
Thanks for the prompt again. So it's been an interesting end. So I would say that I finished the fellowship and we had quite a successful project. And so we achieved the goal of implementing an AI technology into the NHS. And then I have tried to use those skills again and in my day job as a surgeon and explore other companies that we can bring in now that I know I have a framework for how to bring things in, not as a paid role, but just wanting to change clinical practice and wanting to make things easier for ourselves. A big example is the AI scribes that are very prevalent. And actually, it's been really, really difficult to do that in hospitals where they don't have a framework set up, where they don't have the capital to be able to do it. And actually, it's been a little bit jarring to leave the fellowship and come back to the NHS and say, wow, the disparity between what is possible and what we actually have in clinical practice is it's quite vast. I still have hope. I think in the future, that will change. It has to change. But and hopefully the skills that we've gained will still be relevant. But just being able to be dynamic and learn a new set of skills was definitely useful. Personally, what I've done is I've taken the skills and that I gained through the fellowship. Towards the end, I started to get a little bit more technical. So started to go into the development of AI technologies, image-based things. That was purely because my supervisor had those capabilities and was also a researcher, and that was something that I wanted to start exploring. And now I'm setting up a PhD with the crossover of AI and breast cancer, breast surgery specifically. that is not something that was a natural next step. It happened because I happened to meet some people in my supervisor's lab, and then I got in touch with a professor at Imperial, and I had an idea. So that is a possibility if you're interested in doing more of the research. It does open up some doors, and I think it has definitely given me a little bit of credibility when going and speaking to AI researchers and saying, hey, look, if we do create something, I think I have the skills to then actually implement it into the NHS, or at least I know somewhat of the framework as it exists now. So yeah, I think and as Nick has shown, there are lots and lots of opportunities. You have to kind of go and find them yourself. It's not an obvious, unfortunately, we don't have an obvious pathway within the NHS to have a 50-50, like, I don't know, digital tech fellow plus whatever trainee you want to be. It's not formalized as it is with academia or teaching even.
Yeah, thanks, Akriti, and some really, really nice points in there. So you're describing, your experience of going from someone who works in pure clinical to developing these new interesting kind of skills and ideas, and now working in a kind of more technical angle, which is, I think, exactly what the fellowship is meant to do. It's meant to broaden your horizons and give you experience and new knowledge you never thought you'd have. And your last point I thought was really salient, the difficulty of combining a clinical with a non-clinical role when it's innovation or tech or digital. And you're quite right. I'm a NHR clinical lecturer, so I split my time 50-50 research and NHS, and there's a clear pathway for me all the way through to CCT and beyond. And that doesn't exist yet for people that want to do innovation. Maybe that's a big gap that maybe people like yourselves can try and sort out for the people that follow us. But sorry, you're having to struggle through that. Should we go to Charlie next? So again, just a reminder of the question, it's around kind of future career pathways. How has the fellowship changed your career aspirations, and what's your plan for the future? Do you plan to continue to work in AI related roles?
And it's probably slightly unusual in that I am in the later stages of my career. So it's a kind of, I couldn't agree more with what Akriti said. It was a wonderful experience. And I was very grateful for the time to get involved. I've seen some of the questions pop up. So I am one of those people that had what I thought was some AI experience, but actually coding, not my thing. I hadn't got into it, but you can get into it. And I did start to learn that. And it was really interesting. And you realize actually you know a lot more than you did. And I think my background with a PhD did help that. So it was definitely useful. In terms of career progression, for me, the end of the fellowship, our product didn't get through to the stages just because of a government and a change in funding in AIDP. However, what I was able to do was help. There were 2 other fellows in my team from cohort 3 who were James Vaz and Iblal. Iblal's a pharmacist. So we got together, we had 3 different projects running, and it was a real support network. And we come under the umbrella of something called OxCare, which is the Oxford Clinical Artificial Intelligence Research Group. And what that allowed me to do was apply for grants for further funding because it looked really interesting. And again, I think that leap that you talk about, you may not be in a field like I'm a physio, clinical hands-on rehab. Here I am deploying a radiology tool in chest x-ray. I mean, it couldn't be further left field really, but it is about those applied skills that you learn, and then what we are doing for the future proofing for digital literacy, deployment within the NHS and as a future career. And for me, what's happened is that I've been successful in some grant applications, just 2, which I'm not able to tell too much about at the moment. They're just slightly under embargo. But that co-application resulted in me buying out my time. And now I'm moving into an OxCare field, looking at AI deployment, but particularly around clinical stakeholder engagement. So we talked a bit about the tools, but actually what do clinicians feel about AI? Does it make a difference in head-to-head or reader studies? What does it look like? Is AI the best solution? And then particularly around patient and public involvement and engagement. So looking at the patient perspective, do they feel they can trust the AI tool to deliver? Are we going to become a truly autonomous AI service within radiology? What do people feel about that? So some more sort of at the ground level work being done. But for me, completely shaped my future. I wouldn't be anywhere near this a year ago, 12 months ago, and now I'm completely into that avenue, and suddenly got launched into being comms manager for LinkedIn for the group, so as well. So, and designing mugs. I mean, I don't know, it could go anywhere. It is just a beautiful, wonderful experience. And for somebody like me who's a physio and an allied health profession, just to have that really key support from the medics and the surgeons and the GPs around me, just to really push your game up. And it just goes to show you don't have to be 25, 35, 45. You can be in your late 50s and doing this and learning, and you can teach an old dog new tricks.
Love that, Charlie. Thank you ever so much. Really nice reflections on your fellowship experience. And what I've heard so far from our first three panelists is all of you have had your careers changed, probably for the better, I think, by this fellowship, and you've ended up in a place where you didn't think you'd be, and that's a good thing. Change is exciting. So Baz, over to you. Any reflections?
Yeah, I think I echo what a lot of the fellow panelists have said. I think, speaking personally, I knew that I always wanted to, I think, work in non-clinical roles in some capacity, sort of at the intersection of clinical medicine, digital health, and AI. And I think the balance of those three things was probably something that I'd been, as I'm sure we all have been, grappling with. I think for me, one of the sort of clarity I've had, or sort of bits of realization I've had, is that the clinical identity is probably very important for me, and probably the core of what I identify as or feel is kind of gives me the most fulfillment. And then I think the other things around AI deployment, health tech are probably complementary to that, not necessarily competing interests. In terms of my own sort of progress, I guess, since the fellowship. So I've actually stayed on as a clinical AI research fellow based across Kings and the Maudsley. So my supervisor managed to find a little bit of extra budget to keep me on for a few more months. The reason being, the fellowship project was advertised as being deployment of a predictive model, which is sort of what I was interested in around things like change management and AI governance, putting things into practice. The reality was that actually it was a lot more upstream than that, and that the predictive tooling itself was still quite embryonic, and a lot of work needed to be done in terms of the actual development and validation of the model, which I think, to allay a lot of the fears maybe that some prospective applicants have, I hadn't had much experience of. I had a little bit of programming experience, but a lot of it was learning on the job. And I think that was certainly one of the most fulfilling things for me, was being able to upskill myself in those competencies. And it was only because it's only now that we're starting to get towards the deployment side of things, or the operationalizing of the model, that for me, it would have felt like a bit of a shame to have left when it got to the point of which we're actually having something that works. And so thankfully, to that end, my supervisor was able to keep me on. Alongside that, partway through the fellowship year, I sort of joined as a fractional chief medical officer at a pediatric mental health company, which uses predictive tooling to identify children and support parents of children with neurodiversity. Again, aligning with my own personal interests, but certainly I think would only have been made possible with having done the fellowship. In terms of where next, or kind of what next, as I said, I think practicing clinically probably sits at the core of what I do. And I think for GPs on the call, you'll know that there is a lot of flexibility of being able to have that portfolio career, being able to do as much clinical time as you'd like, and then trying to see where else or whatever else it is that you might be interested in. I think for me, again, it's when it comes to working with AI as a non-clinical interest, it's again specifically what aspect of that. And again, something I'd encourage fellows to think about, is it model design? Is it post-market surveillance? Is it regulation? Is it ethics and bias? Is it change management? I mean, nowadays, I think the conversation around AI is becoming a lot more nuanced and a lot more layered. And I think it's possible to position yourself as a specialist within one specific aspect of kind of the AI life cycle. And it's not something that, it's not sort of overnight clarity. It's something that I'm still grappling with, as I'm sure are my fellow panelists. But yeah, certainly something that I think bears some soul searching in terms of what you might want your career to look like post-fellowship.
Thanks, Baz. Some really nice reflections there. And I fully echo all you've just said, really. And what I think is nice about our 4 panelist experience so far is that they've all kind of found a new kind of role within healthcare, their own personal happy place where, this new thing works for them. And there's not one single path, there's not one single job role. The world of medical, clinical, healthcare AI is big, and there's plenty of space for lots and lots of people to take on a very technical, narrow role, all the way through to very wide, broad policy level roles. There'll be a place for everyone, really, and the opportunities are endless, I think. Many of you, as part of your answer to the last question, gave some reflections on kind of new skills and experiences you've gained as part of the fellowship. Just a quick fire question, I guess, and I'll give you a couple of moments to think about it. But what single skill do you think is the most valuable thing that you've acquired as part of your time on the fellowship? And perhaps we can come to Charlie first for this one.
It's an easy one for me. It's about the connection. It gives you so many opportunities. I mean, you can leverage as much as you want to, but that is your opportunity. Your opportunity is those 2 days connecting with all the people on the cohort and the fellowship. Use it really wisely. Just gives you that connection, which means that you then branch out into different areas. Even we've talked about this, you can be on the same corridor as somebody and not know that they are actually doing a similar thing. And as Baz says, is there's kind of these layers that you can have. You can go into the very nuanced bit or the policy. It just expands and expands. It's up to you to run with it as an individual, and if you can, great.
Great. So it's networking and connections for Charlie. Baz, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that was my answer too, but I do have a backup answer, which I think is speaks to Akriti's point earlier, actually, around having a framework for thinking about things. So I think just being more conversant around AI design and deployment. So if someone, were to tomorrow come and say we want to deploy this tool, then just being able to critically appraise it, think about, okay, what is it that they're proposing on doing? Is AI genuinely needed, or could it be some other kind of, simple service redesign? What does success look like? What are the outcome measures? What are the process measures? What else needs to happen alongside AI deployment for there to be meaningful kind of improved quality improvement? So I think, just being more conversant in AI deployment.
Great. So it's so we've got so far networking and connections, and also kind of understanding the pathway and understanding kind of what it means to deploy a piece of technology. Akriti, what's your thought? What's your single most useful skill or insight?
So it's Baz sort of took my backup, actually, but it's fundamentally having a deeper technical understanding by where you can actually critique AI technologies that are coming into the NHS. And I think when I started the fellowship, I had a lot of people saying, oh, we've got this problem, let's just use AI to solve it, or look at this AI technology, and actually knowing what that means, knowing what the problem is, knowing how what do you mean by AI, and actually having that deeper understanding, and then being able to apply it to your relevant field. I think that is the thing that will be most valuable for my career going forward.
Great. So understanding kind of what AI is, what AI can do, what AI can't do, and being maybe the mature voice in the room that can cut through the noise, cut through the hype, and say, well, actually, what is the problem, and are we solving something that's real and tangible? Yeah, I love that. Nick?
Yeah, it's amazing how similarly we all think, actually. I think, Charlie, you probably definitely hit the nail on the head when you talked about the connections and the relationships you make. I think another large insight I gained was to how to address the large number of other factors that can affect how AI tools perform in real life. So if you look at the literature that backs up the AI tools which we currently have on the market, most of it focuses around the technical performance of those tools in lab settings. There hasn't been much real world in vivo testing of those tools. I think we lack that higher level evidence that's investigated factors like real world safety, how it affects clinician performance and their workflows, what the impact on the wider hospital workflow has been. So I think that's a really valuable skill I've learned in terms of addressing a lot of those real world factors. Because AI tools are rarely working in isolation. They occur alongside a human being, alongside other trust systems and clinicians as part of a wide range of trust workflows.
Great, thanks, guys. So I guess just to kind of reiterate on that one, or to maybe summarize underneath them, Our panelists have talked about a series of skills, some of them technical, some of them non-technical. And I guess one takeaway for anyone listening in is that these are not skills they necessarily came to the fellowship with. The fellowship's designed to give you that kind of underpinning of knowledge and experience so you can step into these sort of roles in the future. Very few clinicians or people working in healthcare will have understanding of what a quality management system is, what change management is, what it means to deploy a piece of technology, frankly, what a budget is, and that sort of thing. And so there's no expectation you'd have those skills and knowledge already. That's not a prerequisite for applying. These are things you acquire as part of the fellowship time. That's all what it's all about, really. Great. Let's move on to think about some. We've talked about lots of positives, lots of things that have gone well, but let's go negative for a little while. We talked a little bit earlier on. I think Akriti made the point around how difficult it is to build a portfolio career that is, NHS clinical, but also innovation and technical. Obviously, Nick is working in a role which is now much more industry focused, but I know many people have struggled to get that balance right between, a job that spans NHS and something else. All of you, I guess, equally, what do you think are the main challenges you're going to have in building out a future clinical AI career? Maybe we go to Akriti first because you brought the point up earlier.
So building on the fact that there is no clear pathway, I think in places where there is not funding for it. So I think in Oxford, Oxcare is an amazing setup, and lots of the fellows there in previous cohorts managed to extend their fellowships and go on either to complete their projects or to take on new projects. And I think Oxford is going to get the most out of all of their fellows because they're using the expertise that they've gained. And so I think funding, especially in the cash-strapped NHS that we are, will be the biggest challenge that we face, whether that's for our time, whether that's for new technologies. I think we need dedicated funds towards this, just the same way that we have for academia.
Yeah, okay, so we need more cash. And yeah, any ideas where that money might come from?
I won't say here.
Okay, fair enough. Offline. PMs only. Okay, great. Charlie, any thoughts?
I would say that the hardest bit is when you come back and you have new knowledge. I suppose that's like anything, but particularly in allied or NMAPS world, there is very limited pathways. Again, I think that you've talked about in terms of career. For me, it was realizing that a lot had changed for me. I probably was, like many of the fellows that are talking here, I was really excited about digital, but that isn't enough just to be excited about it. When you come back, you are a lone voice, and it's quite tricky because somebody can go, oh, you know about that, but that doesn't mean any relevance to us seeing, I don't know, 20 patients today to get them out of the hospital. So it's trying to look at the pragmatics around it and what this is going to give us, and sort of view with an outside in lens, but it can be a lonely place. So you have to craft your own pathway. And I think that's a little bit harder maybe easier in nursing, but when I say easier, I don't mean easy particularly, but I would say, yeah, that was the one negative, is that you do have to sort of, craft your own pathway afterwards and find the funding, as Akriti said, which can be tricky, can be difficult.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. I think that's a really nice reflection, and that kind of change in personal identity, that you've gone from being something, whether that's a physiotherapist or a doctor or I don't know, a nurse or whatever, and then you've gone away and done something else. You acquired new skills and new knowledge, and now you come back as still that old thing, but also now something else as well. And your new role is different. You sit in a different space. You have different experience and expertise and a different kind of future career direction. And that can be quite a lonely place when you're coming back, because there now isn't the same path you had before. And certainly, to offer a bit of my own reflection on this one, so I finished my PhD earlier this year and went back into clinical practice, and now have a 50-50 role NHS academia. And it's a similar tension I feel, that when you have two jobs and you're trying to do two things, you're advancing two careers, it's always challenging. You feel like you're in the wrong place. Your inbox is never empty. The to-do list never finishes. Clinical medicine and clinical practice can be quite a nice place because you can go there, do your job, go home again, and that's not the reality of working in a split role. And for some people that's great, and for other people that's really stressful. And I think, understanding that tension is useful, I think. So thanks, nice reflection there. Bab, should we go to you?
Yeah, sure. I guess related, but maybe slightly different in terms of a higher level observation, I think, is just quite the variability in AI maturity, I guess AI infrastructure around different sites. Like Akriti mentioned, obviously Oxford is very AI forward, AI mature, same with Cambridge, Guy's and St Thomas's. But what I found, for example, with South London and Maudsley, despite having some of the richest mental health data, quite possibly in the world, the use of that for kind of like translational commercial purposes is still quite limited. And at the moment, we're seeing that the use of that data is for quite maybe limited or esoteric, like academic interest, kind of answering specific academic questions and then publishing it. And obviously, we are moving the dial slightly, but what I'm not seeing as much of is in terms of that commercialization. And I think whereas other sites, for example, in the US or in London, where you have established tech transfer offices and a real focus on translational research, I don't necessarily see that as being the baseline yet in the NHS. So I think definitely a wicked problem, but trying to have some kind of AI baseline maturity where all trusts are having a framework in place, dedicated AI deployment teams in place, budget. I mean, it comes back to funding, isn't it? Having budget, resource, personnel, all of these things to think about how is AI actually being put into place. And that's been one of my big frustrations because when I speak with kind of my CMO hat on and we're trying to build predictive tooling for neurodiversity, and then I know that the data exists, but then there's this tension between trying to access it for academic purposes, like I am in kind of the fellowship, versus trying to access it for industry academia partnership. And even the things like Innovate UK grants and things like that exist, there is still this reticence, I guess, on the part of both parties. So I think that is probably something that we will need to overcome. And I'm sure as time goes by and fellowships like these will help us to overcome. But yeah, I guess bringing the country up to some kind of baseline AI maturity, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. Really helpful reflections. And maybe an actionable point for future fellows might be to think from kind of early on in the fellowship, kind of what do you do next? And if there are any things that need kind of lead in times, like finding funding, maybe think about that sooner rather than later. So you do have that in place when you finish. Should we come to yourself, Nick? Any reflections on barriers?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be brief because I agree with all of the above, really. I think, I've experienced the keystone is having that human support and human resources around you to be able to, go down a pathway of trying to solve a clinical problem with a digital tool. It's very difficult to do anything in isolation, and everyone in the multidisciplinary team will bring an element to that, and together you have to work as a team to be able to deploy something or adopt a tool. Clinician will bring sort of a knowledge of where a clinical care gap exists, but they have to sit down next to a software engineer to design a tool, and then you need to work with an AI expert. And most trusts, as Baz had alluded to, we don't have that human personnel on the ground on these multiple sites. It'd be great if every hospital had a clinical scientific computing team. That would be the dream, really, that you can go to and then talk to about all the problems you want to solve. So I think that lack of human expertise, locally, who understand the local problems, is a huge limiting factor.
Great. Thanks all. We've talked at length, I think, amongst our panelists. We've had their reflections on their time in the fellowship in clinical AI, the good bits, the skills they've acquired, the ways their careers have changed, what their future looks like, but also focused a little bit on some of the barriers and challenges, I guess, to building a portfolio career or a career in clinical innovation. The last question I have for the panelists was around what advice they'd give to future fellows about making the most of the programme and career in clinical AI generally. Now, I've been keeping an eye on the chat as we've been going, and there's an awful lot of questions in here, specifically on kind of application tips and making the most of the fellowship. So rather than me asking my question, I wondered if we can go to Alicia next to open up to questions from the audience and maybe focus on some of those other bits that have come through in the chat. So Alicia, over to you.
Thanks, Joe. Happy to do that. It's been really interesting. So thank you for all your reflections, and I really like the whole system approach and the real world evidence, but I'll come to that one in a minute. So Long had asked at the start for a bit more about the projects and kind of how you brought that together, I suppose. And Alex has kindly popped in the links to your poster summaries. It might be nice just to hear a couple of minutes or so on what you set out to do, I suppose, and then maybe how did that turn into reality in your proposal. So who would like to go first? Charlie?
Unmute myself. There we go. First learn. So the project that I had, so the projects are sorted out before you apply for the fellowship. So you get matched to a project. So you won't actually know what the projects are. Alex might be able to say some of them might be up beforehand, but I didn't actually know the project until I'd been offered it. And as I said earlier, the project didn't, so mine was in a radiology chest X-ray AI detection tool called Lunit, but it was linked to a platform for governance and security, and that collapsed quite close into about the first 3 months of the project. So you have to kind of pivot quite quickly and learn that there are other aspects within that you can support. So for me, it was really about that life cycle that has been spoken about by the fellows. So I was linked to the, I'm going to say acronyms here. So DPIA, so Data Protection Information Asset, and looking at how you create the safety mechanism within the project life cycle. So I was really into governance, and then safe deployment was the process that I was involved in.
Lovely, thanks, Charlie. I think someone did mention about the flexibility and being able to pivot being really important. Anyone else want to say a wee bit more about what project they were involved in and how that shifted?
Yeah, I can. Okay. So my project was on radiotherapy planning. So when oncologists are planning for radiotherapy, they just very quickly, they get a CT scan of somebody, and then they have to go through that CT scan slice by slice and manually draw around the target that they want to get with their radiotherapy, and also the organs that they want to avoid. And it's quite a manually laborious process, but actually AI is very good at auto contouring, as we call it. So recognizing images and basically drawing lines around them. And if you give the algorithms enough data, you can get decent output. So, and there were 9 commercially available companies when I started, and UCLH had already bought one. So a lot of the legwork had been done before I started, which was really, really helpful. And my job was to go through some of the safety paperwork and do that, and then actually deploy it, and then do some post-deployment analysis. So I managed to, because we already had a team set up before I joined, including physicists and clinicians, I was able to run through the deployment process in the first 3 months that we were there, and then focus on post-deployment analysis. And that has been the bulk of my work, which we focused on some technical analysis, so actually seeing how good the software was, but fundamentally that had been done when the software needed to get its CE mark and get approved to be licensed in the UK. So we were just doing a very small sample of that, and actually the main focus was to see how this affected clinicians' output and whether it changed the speed at which patients were going through the workflow. And we realized a lot of that. I think I've seen someone on the comment write something about MRI scans, and even though reporting can be quickened, does it really matter if you're waiting 1 year for a scan? And we sort of mapped out our process and realized that because our clinicians all contour on a certain day their job plans, until we have flexibility in that so that they can approve contouring the same day that the scan happens or something, we're not going to get the efficiency gains from AI. So my project had a few different elements of it. You had the safety element, you had the deployment bit, and then you had the post-deployment analysis, which was really good. And then towards the end, I joined the research team slightly and started to look at how we can actually change these models and improve those models. But that was a sort of add-on because I was interested in that. So I think it's really important you find a supervisor and you can see who your supervisors are on the project and you have a look at them and see what they can offer, because that will really change your ability to pivot, as Charlie said, if something goes wrong with your project. And so don't just look at the project that's advertised, try and join an environment where you'll be able to pivot should you need to.
Lovely, thanks, Akriti. And there's a question there from Trina in how to find the supervisor. They're listed, aren't they, on the website, the supervisors and where the projects are. So I'd point you to that, Karina. I hope that helps. There's been a couple of questions about that kind of, and you reflected on some of that, about the what next and the career, that there's a reflection on that kind of missing career gap for clinical AI and how clinical AI can fit into a clinical career, and how many move from the clinical AI back into NHS versus academia, or in your space, Nick, into industry. And I just wondered on your reflections of what do you think might need to happen to help some of that, to help you maintain that career trajectory? Nick, can I come to you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a great question. Now, I think if I'm thinking back to my cohort, and maybe Alex, if he's on the call here, can correct me. I think most people manage to maintain some sort of connection to either AI research or an industry. And I guess it depends on what you want to do. So I think quite a few of us continued the research that we'd begun with the same research team that we were deployed at. So for me, my supervisor kindly funded some additional months for me to stay on until my TOEFL fellowship funding came through, which is now finished. So I kind of managed to continue on in that regard. And until 2 weeks ago, I was splitting my week between 3 days clinical, 1 day research, and 1 day industry, which I don't recommend doing. But I think there are opportunities, and I think this is a really good springboard and will give you a good foundation in just, first of all, deciding what you're interested in and what you want to do. Because there will be opportunities out there, and those opportunities I think you'll learn about and will become visible as you go through the fellowship and as you meet various people and as you develop your contacts and your networks.
Fantastic, thanks, Nick. Yeah, you've reflected on how important those networks are, and it sounds like that cohort kind of continues over time, so you become a bit of an alumni group to link up to as well. Val, have you reflections from GP land, primary care world, and that clinical?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, I guess, being opportunistic and I guess keeping your eyes open for opportunities that may sort of present themselves, whether it's, as Nick mentioned, finding additional funding or trying to see if there are other kind of fellowships or PhD opportunities that may stem from the fellowship. But I think where designated or specific roles may not exist, where other fellowships or PhDs not exist, I think it's almost about trying to create almost a business case for yourself as a clinical informatician or clinical AI person in terms of what you're able to contribute to a given project. Because I think maybe as medics, we've not necessarily had to market ourselves because we've not had to do that. The career pathway has always been laid out for us. But I think being able to say that, this is the experience that I've had, these are the competencies I've gained, this is specifically what I'm interested in, this is where I think I might be able to contribute or add value, I think, and then taking that to where AI projects are existing or private sector companies and things like that. And as I said, trying to be a little bit more nuanced in what you're going to them with. So I think maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I recall simply saying that, I have an interest in digital health or AI in healthcare was sufficient to help us stand out as clinicians because it was so nascent and because there weren't many people there. But I think as the field becomes more competitive and as the caliber of people in this space becomes more and more high quality, it's both exciting, but it also means that it forces you to reinvent yourself or establish yourself as probably an expert in a specific domain. And nowadays we're finding that, you know, for example, if regulation is what you're interested in, software as a medical device regulation or UKCA marking, then being able to say that this is the experience I've had within the fellowship year, could I come on as some kind of regulatory advisor or regulatory consultant? But trying to be more targeted and specific, I think will certainly hold you in good stead. I think it's probably necessary in a space that's so fast moving and so competitive.
Fantastic. That's really great advice, Val. And but then coming back to the points you were saying at the start, you don't need to be an expert in those areas at that point. You just need to be interested in that particular area or question, and use the fellowship as time to build up that expertise and that understanding as well too. Just to remind people that have joined us, so that this is cohort 5 that runs next summer. It starts in August, and it's 2 days a week that you're part funded for 12 months. So it would run alongside the current post. And I think the closing date, I just wanted to check for people. I think it's the 15th of December, but don't take my word for it. I checked the online. I've got thumbs up from Charlie. So yes, it's the 15th of December. Just before we come to a close, I wonder if I could just go around and ask you all what would be like the one little nugget of advice that you would give future fellows in that might be interested in applying to this particularly. Akriti, I'll come to you first.
What tips would I give someone applying? I think in terms of strengthening your application, there might be things that you've done in the past that you don't think would be directly relevant. So you don't have to have had an incredibly technical background, but just think of times where you have solved problems in the NHS. And I think also there's lots of things you can be doing to upskill yourself, which show your passion for the area. And again, just reiterating, you don't have to apply for a project that's directly in your field. Try and think of something that is complementary, and how it might help, or look at the supervisors, and you know, you can maybe come up with a project that will be beneficial to all. But those would be my top tips.
That's loads, Akriti. Everyone's scribbling them down. Nick, what would be your top tip?
Yeah, I think you know, a really good way to use a fellowship is to be able to see the whole life cycle of clinical AI, not just the interesting model or data set. So don't stop at we train this really cool algorithm, but follow the problem through, how the need was defined, how the tool fits into the workflow, what the risks are, etc. So the more you lean into that governance, safety, IT integration parts of deployment, the more valuable and transferable your experience will be. And I think secondly, be quite deliberate about the relationships you come across during your fellowship. You make the time to work closely with the digital and IT teams, safety officers, data scientists, etc. Because those conversations will really improve your project, and they become a network that makes a longer term career in clinical AI possible.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nick. Charlie?
I'm probably going to flip the onus back onto me, just because I was only one of 2 physios that have done the programme. So I'm saying my legacy back to the programme is that the experience that I've got is to tell everybody about it, and to really showcase that it doesn't have to be, like we've talked about, one unique person. It is not, they're not looking for a specific person that has all these skills already and has all these layers to their portfolio or their career development. This is about, you know, using this experience and really tapping into the whole life cycle of the AI. But for me, it is about now leveraging what we've learned and say, this is going to stay, AI is here, let's make it safe. You're going to get the knowledge and you can use it really well.
Lovely. Thanks, Charlie. And lastly, Val.
Yeah, again, I think to Nick's point, it's trying to be more proactive. I do think the fellowship is sort of as much or as little as you make of it, and I think it requires a lot of self-direction, or I guess motivation on the part of the fellows to get the most out of it. For example, I had hoped that my project would be more towards deployment and implementation, but actually when it transpired that it was more upstream than that, then it kind of took me going to my supervisor and saying, actually, this is one of the things I wanted to get out of the year. And then he was able to plug me into the clinical informatics team, whose role it is to actually look at the post-market surveillance, which is probably something I might not necessarily have had exposure to if I hadn't had sought that out. And then because it is such a quick year as well, I mean, it is only 12 months, and no sooner have you joined, you're starting to think about what comes next. So probably trying to be a bit more tangible in what your deliverables or what output you hope to achieve from the year is, whether that's like growing your network, attending conferences, poster presentations, publications, things like that, because it really is a great opportunity to have this dedicated, protected time to explore these interests of yours that we otherwise wouldn't get the chance to do as clinicians. And so trying to have a bit of almost like a bucket list, I think, will help you to get the most out of your year. But yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Val. Really fantastic. It's been fantastic to hear from different experiences, both from allied health professionals through to health in the community and in acute as well too, and an industry viewpoint too. Just to wrap us up, our next clinical AI interest group is on the 13th of January. Emma's kindly popped it in the chat, where we'll be joined by Robin Williams and Catherine Creswell. We'll be talking about putting AI in the forefront. No, putting the UK, sorry, at the forefront of AI to benefit health. They're going to share their findings from the evaluation of the NHS AI lab. So whenever you're talking about real world evidence, it's really great to hear from Catherine and Robin. So do join us in January. Lastly, just say once again a huge thank you to our fellows, and I hope that's really inspired some of you, if not this year, but certainly in the future, to apply and build networks to really help us all to achieve this kind of successful development and deployment of AI where it's needed. And it's not always the solution, which a few of you reflected on as well too, which was lovely. So thanks very much. Hope you have a lovely afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.